Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Greenough, and I'm a social anthropologist with WASCAL based in Ouagadougou at the Competence Center there. I'm going to talk about some of my findings from my preliminary study on pastoralism in Burkina Faso. And although the abstract says Ghana, because of budget and logistics limitations, I wasn't really able to include Ghana. So, brief rundown of the contents. This is a preliminary study to discover communities' perceptions of socio-economic and ecological change, i.e. climate change. There are different types of migrations, market dynamics, livestock and dairy, and pastoralist relations with authorities. We conducted men's and women's focus groups in 11 communities, 22 focus groups. When I say we, I mean myself and two translators, a young man and a young woman. I conducted interviews with different government authorities and conversations with leaders of local NGOs and associations. I'm currently still working on data analysis, and this presentation is just going to look at a part of all of that research that we conducted. So, the communities are located in Burkina Faso in northern Ghana. First, we went to the southwest area, not to be confused with the sud-ouest region, but a few of the communities were in that sud-ouest region. We went next to two communities in upper east Ghana, and then we went up to the Sahel region in northeast Ghana, northeast Burkina Faso, right around Dori. All the communities have random code names, so you can't tell who they are. So first, I'll look at migrations in and out. Migrations of households to establish their community in the present locations, and migrations of households out of those communities. We asked people where they came from, when, and why. The Sahelian communities are the oldest by hundreds of years. But there was at least one community in the southwest that moved to their present location around 1900. The rest are more recent. 3 communities moved out of Burkina and then back into Burkina, and one of those communities returned to Ghana after a year of going through the same stuff that they had gone through already in Burkina Faso. The southwestern communities told us that despite the fact that they were the first immigrants into an area and are citizens of Burkina Faso, even more recent immigrants call them foreigners now. So this map shows the trajectories of people's migrations into the communities where they're located now. And this map shows trajectories of households that moved out. And this community up here, which I call South, has the most households moving out because they've got real problems, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, this chart shows reasons that households moved into the present locations and then out again. Some households moved out again. The major reason for moving to the southwest was lack of pasture, either because of drought or because of field expansion. And the reasons for moving out of these communities were also need for pasture. The red arrows here show that several of the other reasons for moving are related to lack of pasture. And this contradicts what national officials at the Ministry of Animal Resources in Burkina Faso told me a couple of years ago, that water is the major problem, not pasture, and that if pastoralists are provided with water, they will not move. Northern community in the southwest area skewed these results somewhat because they have a very bad problem with the nearby national forest. So you can see they're surrounded by national forest on almost 3 sides and a growing town, almost city, on the fourth side. The forest, the green area, was recently released to a European who runs it as a game hunting reserve. And where pastoralists used to be able to graze their herds, they are now fined hundreds of thousands of francs if they even approach the reserve. So it's a big, really big problem. So now we'll talk about transhumance, which is seasonal migration to look for pasture for the cattle herds. And I talked to a few people who talked also about transhumance for small ruminants also, but that's a little bit more rare. So the green routes on this big map show transhumance routes that authorities told me about. And this is by no means all of the routes, but it gives a small idea of some of the movements that pastoralists make within Burkina Faso, but also between countries, from Niger through Burkina into Ghana, from Burkina down into Togo, into Ghana, etc., and also into Côte d'Ivoire. Notice the focus on this Sud-West region, where authorities told me this is not a good place to raise livestock, but somewhat contradicted by the pastoralist actions here. So now I'll briefly discuss what the communities told us about their own transhumance. Most of the communities practice dry season transhumance. A few communities practice rainy season transhumance to remove cattle from cultivation areas. This was where people had too much cultivation around their home and no pasture during the rainy season. The Ministry of Animal Resources distinguishes between short and long transhumance, and the green arrows in the previous slide showed long transhumance. Most of my research communities practice relatively short transhumance, but, most communities in the Southwest have had to lengthen their transhumance because near their homes, access to resources has been blocked or pasture taken over by fields. Among concerns for the future, Southwest pastoralists fear that their transhumance will be constricted by expansion of fields and urban areas, and also by conflict. In the Southwest, young men take the herd south to take advantage of rains that come earlier in the south before the rainy season comes to their home. Women who used to accompany their husbands on transhumance no longer accompany them because of potential conflict, which is a really big problem in this area. The young men who take the cattle out risk their cattle and even their lives now when they go on transhumance. And here's Sa has a completely different dynamic. One elder takes the herds with some young men a short distance during the rainy season to customary pasture. But here they fear that the city is going to take over their customary pasture. So this community is really trapped in this area here. In northeast Ghana, these two communities that we talked with, they use the National Reserve area. So a different situation than Burkina. They go down toward the White Volta, where they pasture their animals. And here the wives will accompany their husbands. At least some of them do. In northeast Burkina, we found the most varied patterns of mobility. Two communities close to the city of Duri practice rainy season and some dry season transhumance to specific pastures only 5 to 10 kilometers away from their homes. Various household members, sometimes the whole household takes the herds, especially during rainy season transhumance. The most northerly community, which is based in a pastoral zone, practices the most nomadic type of transhumance, very opportunistic dry season mobility, where the entire household takes a herd wherever the best pasture can be found. Now we'll move on to the question of climate change. We asked people what they knew about changement climatique, or changement de climat, using the French phrase. Interestingly, the Ghana communities, even though they've lived in Ghana for 30 years, responded more to the French phrase and knew absolutely nothing about climate change in English, which shows something about their non-integration into Ghanaian culture. In most focus groups, only 1 or 2 people admitted to any understanding of changement climatique. So you see the X's up at the top there, where people said that they did know something, they heard about it and they knew a little bit about it. It was usually just 1 or 2 people that said that they knew something about it. In the one Ghana community, only a few men had heard about changement climatique from passing pastoralists. The latter 3 understandings down at the bottom, sedentarized pastoralists, this is what changement climatique means to them. Sedentarized pastoralists create groupements or local associations, or that changement climatique means that they will get project amenities. These all have to do, these understandings link changement climatique with projects and government views of modernization of livestock raising. Moving on to change in the communities, we asked 2 sets of questions. Near the beginning of our focus group questionnaire, we first asked, what has changed in your community? And then we asked right after that, after they answered that question, what do you think will happen in the future? Then at the very end of the questionnaire, after asking about markets and transhumance and changement climatique, we asked, how have the seasons changed? And then, how do you think the seasons will change in the future? The most important observation here is how important, even more important, socioeconomic changes, primarily due to demographic growth, are to all the communities. But even demographic growth is linked in different ways to ecological changes. In Southwest Burkina, people described more socioeconomic changes than ecological changes. Even when we asked about changes in seasons, they included socioeconomic changes. In Ghana and Northeast Burkina, some socioeconomic changes were positive, such as increased herds and increased livestock health in Ghana compared to where they had been in Burkina, and schools and health services in Northeast Burkina. No ecological changes were positive anywhere. For most communities, future concerns, fears, and hopes are socioeconomic and not ecological. What this tells me, just an impression, is that pastoralists, when not constrained by socioeconomic factors, can deal more easily with the ecological changes that face them here. This great, big, huge chart here. All the groups cited different types of unpredictable rainy seasons. And this bar at the very top is a bit skewed because I combined several types of rainy season variations into one. But it reflects the effect of climate change, I think, on the rainy season, and that it's a big concern for people. And the effects of the rainy season variations result in insufficient harvests, which is the second bar there, and less groundwater, which is the 4th bar. And the 3rd bar, women are mostly concerned with poverty, difficulty, and fatigue, and they hope for food, health, and peace. In the Southwest, loss of pasture and natural resource access is due to field expansion and urbanization, whereas in Northeast Burkina, lack of rainfall and species loss affect pasture quality and quantity. So that's ecological, whereas in Southwest, it's demographic. In Southwest Burkina, pastoralists were very concerned with conflict and being seen as foreigners, even by migrants who've come to the area years or decades after the pastoralists arrived. The need for government and or NGO help was mostly seen in a collaborative sense, not we need people to do things for us or give us stuff, which is what I often hear elsewhere, but we need help to build infrastructure or to open access to resources. Several communities, especially in the Southwest, would like to change or modernize livestock raising, or as we say in Burkina, élevage. In one community, a very active community leader engaged young and old men in a brief debate, and I don't have time to discuss this, but it was on élevage moderne. Although ecological changes are important, socioeconomic changes are just as or even more important, especially in Southwest Burkina. And this is supported throughout pastoralism. It's supported by the literature. These changes are all linked together. Except in the Sahel region, pastoralists have no secure tenure, even for residences and fields. A community who's been there 30 years can be kicked out tomorrow if surrounding neighbors decide that something's wrong or there's some conflict situation. Governments seem to have little specific knowledge of the pastoralists and pastoralism as a livelihood system. Settling for pastoralists means not being forced to move their communities and having secure tenure. Settling for authorities usually means giving up transhumance. Both communities and authorities cite the need to change livestock raising, but what does this mean for either of them? In Burkina Faso and northern Ghana, climate change means more variable and unpredictable rainy seasons. Pastoralists for millennia have adapted to variable unpredictability with various strategies, but primarily through mobility and optimum herd size. Field and urban expansion and other socio-economic variables obstruct these strategies. But there are also agropastoralists in peri-urban environments in West Africa who are adapting by confining fewer cattle at home and feeding with supplemental forage. But what does this mean for rural pastoralists? How can changing strategies adapt to climate change and socio-economic changes? We have to, I don't have to answer this question for myself, but I often have to find myself answering this question, why? Why not just turn pastoralists into regular, sedentary agropastoralists? I'm an anthropologist, that's culture, people, come on. Though the contribution of pastoralism is not counted as such, pastoralists are not counted. Éleveurs are counted, but that's a sort of different thing. Livestock raising in general, which is counted, contributes a large percentage to Burkina's export economy. And pastoralists raise the great majority of cattle in Burkina Faso. As one animal resources director told me, if Burkina had no pastoralists, they would have to import meat, milk, and even oxen for field labor. So in order to answer the question, how to adapt pastoralism to combined climate and socioeconomic changes, we need baseline information about how pastoralist household economies work now, about pasture usage and knowledge at home and on transhumance, and about water usage and knowledge at home and on transhumance, so that we can figure out what change will mean economically and ecologically. Pastoralists and their livelihood system need better recognition by government authorities and even researchers. They need secure community tenure so that they can build infrastructure. They need delimited and secure pastoral zones, which are important for both climate change mitigation as carbon sinks and for other ecosystem services, and climate change adaptation for refuge pastures. Pastoralists need delimited and secure access routes to natural resources, again legislated officially on paper, but not enforced in reality. And they need government recognition and inclusion of pastoralists' local knowledge would greatly contribute to more effective local management of pastoral zones and routes, and one of the most sensitive issues, local inclusion in park and forest management. Along with pastoralist inclusion in natural resource management, government ministries and agencies also need to be implicated in pastoralists' own strategies of change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. The floor is open. Mark?
Yeah, if I may. Just for clarification, Karen, thanks. What's élevage moderne? You mentioned that farmers or pastoralists are discussing to engage in élevage moderne. I don't understand the term.
It means different things to different people, and that's one of the things that needs to be researched. I mean, it means one thing to animal resources people, and it means, because I mean, this is like a buzzword, sort of, in the local sense, but in general, it means reducing the numbers of livestock that they own, confining at least some of the cattle at home, feeding with supplementary forage, which right now some people have tried. Some people are doing some of that, have tried it. Some men that I've talked to who sort of tried that a little bit, especially fattening bulls for sale, it was too expensive. It just wasn't economically viable for them. So that whole idea of, but then people are trapped. It's like we don't have place, we can't move anywhere. We don't have pastures. So how can we change? So they have this idea of élevage moderne, but it doesn't, it's just sort of floating out there, this idea of, and nobody has any idea of whether it will be actually economically viable or even ecologically viable, because you confine cattle in one area for a long period of time, you're going to degrade the land, etc. And I mean, what does it all mean? Yeah.
So it doesn't mean importing cattle from Europe like
No.
they do in Senegal?
No. In fact, even Animal Resources regional director was telling me we don't need imported cattle. Our cattle are fine. We don't, these cattle are the best. I mean, they're indigenous cattle. They're made for that area. Of course, there is some difference because you have the Sahelian. They don't have any of the red zebu, but they have the white zebu cattle, and then those are interbred with the small dwarf cattle in the south, and so you have this sort of different mixtures of breeds, which they have different names for. I haven't gotten in too much into that, but they're all indigenous, and I don't know, nobody wants to change the breeds or anything at all. It's just this idea of how can we raise the cattle differently somehow to take account for this demographic growth that's taking over the pasture.
In Ghana, we've been jealous of your cattle for 100 years already.
What?
In Ghana, we've been jealous of your cattle for 100 years already.
Well, yeah, in Ghana, when I was down in Tamale area, the villagers are saying, well, can't you bring us some of those Sahelian goats and sheep? We really want those. I can't, sorry.
During the colonial period,
Yeah.
The cattle in Upper Volta was highly regarded.
Yeah. Well, the problem with bringing the zebu cattle south is then they're susceptible to the tsetse fly and that big long word that I have trouble pronouncing, trypanosomosis or something like that. So they have to have annual vaccinations against that. But once that they're interbred with the dwarf cattle, which are not susceptible, then they have some immunity. So that's something interesting to look into also.
When I had my presentation, I mentioned that one of the priorities set by the government in the NAPAR is livestock and water. Yeah? And you just said it's not so much about water, it's about pasture.
Water,
so is it a mismatch? Have you had time to look at the document?
No, not so much, but water is a problem, and one of the problems is that people come in and projects or the government come in and put in the forage with the hand pumps and stuff, which are not appropriate for watering cattle. I mean, you just don't get enough water out of those things, and so they're looking for surface water, and they can't always find it. And one community, they had a reservoir nearby, but the dam broke, and so now they dig wells in the reservoir bottom, but even that, the wells will go dry. So they want to be able to build their own reservoir, but they know that if they build their own reservoir, the other village communities will take it over. But even the Ministry of Animal Resources people at the national level told me that they have their own problem, that ministry just doesn't have enough power. And they tell me they have their own problems when they go out and build something for the pastoralists, the surrounding villagers come and take it over. So that's one of the problems. It's not just policy, it's an enforcement problem.
Nicholas, and then...
I wanted to know, do farmers in Burkina Faso also have this sort of integrated system where they're depending on cattle but also on agriculture then, or are they rather keeping it separate? The question comes from the fact that oftentimes I've been told that in Burkina Faso people would have much more manure at hand and therefore could also eventually produce better quality dry season vegetables. So
It depends on the community. It depends. That's one thing I didn't say, is that we were working with Fault Bay pastoralists. Not all pastoralists are Fault Bay, but the Fault Bay are the great majority of pastoralists, and almost all of the pastoralists in Burkina Faso and probably all of them in Ghana are really agro-pastoralists, but they depend a lot on their livestock. The Fault Bay or Fulani use the manure. I mean, they put their cattle on the pasture, on the fields, and so their fields are well manured. It depends on the community of the other ethnic groups, the other cultivators, whether or not they use manure. Sometimes it depends on how long they've been involved in projects that have been telling them to put manure on their fields. It depends on whether or not they have livestock so that they have manure. One of the things that's interesting to me, because I spent a long time in Niger, and in the literature, maybe in Mali, I think in Mali maybe, I'm trying to remember the stuff I've read, you have this idea of manure contracts. So you have farmers who want manure on their field, and they call the pastoralists in to pasture in their fields or surrounding their fields during the dry season so that their fields get manured. But I have not seen anything like that in Burkina or Ghana. So it's like, is the literature wrong? Is it just, am I just in the wrong place? It's very, to me, that's kind of strange, but I don't know. But this idea, in the Central Plateau, Mosi area, where they've had a long time working with projects and stuff, you see a lot of people carrying manure out to their fields. In other communities, when that was one of the things that was part of our, the last program I worked with was this livestock cultivation integration. To me, coming from Niger, where, except way up north where the fields are too hot and they don't want manure on their fields, they don't get enough rain to compost it. People buy manure in South Niger. I mean, it's just like, you put manure on your fields there. And to come to communities here where you have manure and that people don't even think about putting it on their fields is very bizarre to me. But yeah, it depends. It really depends on where you're at and what the history is with manure. But there's this growing use of investment in livestock by farmers, and so there will be more integration.
Take last question.
I just want to change a little bit to the question Papa was asking you. Is kind of, I don't know too much about it, but I mean, it seems that in other parts of West Africa, much of the transition you're asking about how can this happen, why is it happening, or so, has already happened or partially happened. Can't you learn from maybe historical processes that took place in Senegal since long, and try to learn from them for...
You mean the adaptation?
Yes,
yes.
Also change of livelihood strategies,
yes.
and I mean, kind of,
yes.
I mean, so, I mean, it's
that's
not happening in a vacuum.
I was hoping that Mike Moritz came, because that's exactly what he did his thesis on, was that transformation in northern Cameroon. So that's what I was referring to. I just didn't have time to go into, yes, that's what I was briefly referring to by talking about the peri-urban adaptation, and even in Ouaga itself, there are Fault Bay women who are raising cattle in the streets of their neighborhood, and in the rainy season they go out to pasture, and in the dry season there they are in the streets. They go out to pasture and come back at night, and so they're raising these cattle and selling the milk and selling the manure and selling the bulls when they get, they fatten the young bulls and sell them and making money. So why is it these women can make money, and then there's Mosi women up north of Ouaga who are fattening bulls, making money. So how is it these women can make money, but the men I talk to are saying it doesn't work for them?